Back to this breaking news. We are monitoring French President Emmanuel Macron. He's about to appear at the White House any second. The First Lady and the President will greet the French President and Mrs. Macron at the White House. Let's bring in Trump 2020 campaign senior advisor Katrina Pierson. It's an historic visit, Katrina. Now even President Macron effectively saying, you know what, Trump is a president to the American people. He's giving that message. American people, deal with it. He's the president.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this truly is a refreshing display of leadership. You have two leaders who don't agree 100% on all of the policy positions, but who have become friends and respect each other as leaders. And now we're here having a great visit. I fully expect President Macron to make his case with regards to trade in Syria and Iraq. But here, I mean, Iran. So here's the thing. President Trump is going to consider the president of France's council, absolutely, as a courtesy, Liz. But let's make no mistake. The president of the United States will be making policy for the United States. So I think this is a great opportunity for many in our own country to see how elected leaders should act.
Yeah, you know, your point's well taken, because the thinking in the EU is President Macron is the leading edge of that wedge to get the president to step back from the Iran deal, dial back on, the tariffs and the potential trade wars, also climate change. But your point is President Trump's not going to do that, right?
No, I don't think so, because these are things that the president has held very dear. I mean, we've seen it throughout the campaign. You can go all the way back to the 80s on some of these positions. But I do think he would consider the council. But at the same time, the president has made a commitment to the United States, and that is to put America and its people first. That is not going to change. And I think the president of France respects the president's opinion as well. Okay. And when we look at the things like Iran, for example, the president was very adamant on making some significant changes, things that a lot of people agree with, regardless of how we entered this deal. We have a new leader of the United States, and he wants to have input.
So we're monitoring the situation unfolding right now at the White House. You're looking at a live action shot of the White House. The president of France with the First Lady of France expected to appear momentarily to greet the president and First Lady Melania Trump. President Macron, to your point, Katrina, is expected to press President Trump on trade. Here's what he said over the weekend.
You cannot make a trade war with your ally. It's too complicated. If you make war against everybody, you make trade war against China, trade war against Europe, war in Syria, war against Iran. Come on, it doesn't work. You need an ally. We are the ally.
Okay, so here's the messaging problem, right, for the president. Katrina, he's got to say, listen, we're not talking about trade war. We're talking about fair trade, and the EU needs to get that message. China has not been fair. Go ahead.
Well, absolutely. And we keep hearing that the president is doing this to everyone else, when in fact, everyone else has done this to the United States. And the president is simply saying, look, we need fair and reciprocal trade. At the end of the day, that's what's going to matter. Many people in our own country have doubted his ability to make these deals and to get things done. But if you look at ISIS and tax reform, he's even bringing North Korea to the table. So the president is actually doing things right. It might be different, but we're actually getting things done. And I think President Macron is going to get to hear President Trump's position on these things as well.
Here's an unfolding breaking news situation that is happening right now with Russia and Iran as it pertains to the EU. Katrina, to your point, record amounts of U.S. oil is now flooding into EU markets. That deal with Iran that Obama struck, there's a May 12th deadline that is looming. The president could yank what he says is the worst deal ever and impose sanctions. Again, Iran is backed by Russia. Russia supplies a lot of oil and nat gas to the EU. We are just hearing the breaking news that the U.S. is now becoming the #1 oil exporter into the EU, changing geopolitical landscape in the favor of the U.S. right here, Katrina.
Well, and that's exactly what we call making America great again. And President Trump knows one thing, and that is leverage. He wrote about it. And he knows, and the world knows, that if the president was to pull out of the Iran deal, perhaps go back to the sanctions on the Iran Central Bank or oil exports, it's going to be a problem. But these are things like, looking at including the long-range missiles and, eliminating the sunset provision on things like, I don't know, enriching uranium, which is a huge problem for Iran.
Okay.
And the president of France needs to understand we don't see the death to France chants coming out of Iran, like we see coming from Iran to America. And President Trump takes that very seriously.
Well, they are now, as you can see, at the White House raising the welcoming flags 15 months into his presidency. The president is finally rolling out the red carpet for the president of France. What will happen after Macron appears, they will go for a sunset dinner on the terrace of George Washington's home in Mount Vernon overlooking the Potomac. Katrina, Macron is expected to your point, really press the president on the Iran deal. He is a leader. He's seen by the EU as the Trump whisperer, that he can basically coax the president into staying in the Iran deal. Macron, though, watch this, Katrina, admitting, though, that that deal, as the president has said, has flaws. Watch.
Is this agreement perfect, and this JCPOA a perfect thing for our relationship with Iran? No. But for nuclear, what do you have as a better option? I don't see it.
The car that is now rolling up with the leader of France. So Macron says the day we finish the war against ISIS, if we leave it open to Iran and Syria. They're going to fuel a new terrorist war. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think President Trump is also coming at this from a different perspective. You know, we've been doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and President Trump doesn't want to do that anymore. And he's not saying end it all together. He wants to make revisions. And now that we see that they're cracking down on anti-government protesters, that's a problem, particularly if we're just going to sit back and allow this to happen, not really knowing what's going on.
Let me break in here. The president is just stepping outside the White House with the First Lady, ready to greet the president of France and Mrs. Macron as well. Tomorrow night, there will be a state dinner in a break with tradition. President Trump has invited no Democrat members of Congress or journalists. About 150 guests will take their seats in the state dining room tomorrow night. It's going to be a more intimate affair than those held by President Barack Obama. Obama's guest list tended to number into the hundreds. The president really wants to keep this close relationship, and here he is, the president of France, greeting and a hug with the president of the United States. Let's watch this and let's let this moment sink in. Okay, Katrina, what we're watching now is a warm embrace between the leader of France and his wife is with the leader of the United States. It looks really quite collegial. They are now turning now for the official photographs. Katrina, the president seems to be going all out on pomp and circumstance. That's how much fun he had in Paris last July when the president of France invited him to watch the annual Bastille Day. What's your reaction here to rolling out the red carpet for the president of France?
Well, it is Donald Trump, Liz, so I think we could fully expect the best with the president and Melania, who is a class act in and of her own. I mean, it's an amazing opportunity for us to all see what we're seeing right now, and that is, refreshing leadership, bringing two countries together, even though they have their differences, willing to work together for what they do agree upon.